Hey guys, welcome back to the Bucket Think Tank. So originally, I was going to talk about DC and Marvel as a whole um, with this video, but with the Justice League movie coming out, well, it's already out now, and I haven't seen that yet, and I probably want to talk about it. I figured the best thing to do now would be to cover up some ground on a video I felt was a bit lacking, which is the Ducktales video, which was originally supposed to be much longer and more in depth. But some computer problems stopped me from doing that. So to make up for it, I want to talk about the big three antagonists in the DuckTales mythos, which would be Scrooge McDuck's three biggest enemies. It should be noted that DuckTales does not have a very broad and consistent rogues gallery. A lot of enemies don't return again. Well, like, we never see the Terra Firmians outside of their first appearance, as far as I can tell, and the same thing could be said of the Wizard Murloc from the DuckTales movie, which we will talk about, and also Armstrong the Robot, who had one episode and was more like a cautionary tale for Gyro and everyone else. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to talk about the big three of DuckTales, which would be the Beagle Boys, Flintheart Glomgold, and Magica De Spell, and hopefully by the time this video is over, you'll have a broader understanding of these characters and how they fit into the DuckTales canon, hopefully what we can expect from them in the future with the 2017 version. So first, to understand these characters, you have to understand the two biggest people behind, not just them, but the Duck universe as a whole, and that would be Carl Barks and Don Rosa. Now, Carl Barks is the person behind the creation of Scrooge McDuck, Duckburg. He made it so Calisota was actually a state, and that's where Duckburg is. He also created Gladstone Gander, the Junior Woodchucks. He pretty much created everything but Donald, Daisy, Grandma Duck, the nephews, and possibly a few others. But when you think of the Duck universe as a whole, you would think of Carl Barks. After him is Don Rosa, who, among other things, took ideas Carl Barks left in Scrooge's life history, little mentions here and there, and would later flesh them out into the life and times of Scrooge McDuck, which is this huge origin story for how Scrooge became so rich. One thing to know is that, as far as I can tell so far, neither of these two men had any real share input into the DuckTales canon as a cartoon series or even as a comic book, because there are different titles for the comic books when it comes to the Duck universe. There's Uncle Scrooge Adventures, Donald and Scrooge, and so on and so forth. DuckTales is only one part of a much larger Duck universe. So with that in mind, let's go down. Let's go into the library. So first up is the Beagle Boys. Now, in terms of popularity, the Beagle Boys are easily the most popular and recognizable, I think, just because we see a lot more and they have a lot more episodes. And this isn't just exclusively only to the comics and the cartoon, because they've also made appearances outside of that. They were most recently in the Kingdom Hearts Dream Drop Distance game. Although they didn't look exactly like the Beagle Boys as we see them, that's who they were. That's who they are written down as in the credits as well. But their first appearance was in the last page of Walt Disney Comics and Stories number 134. And that was kind of it until Uncle Scrooge number 1, Only a Poor Old Man. And since then, the Beagle Boys have constantly tried to steal Scrooge's money by any means necessary, no matter how simple or how extreme. At one point, they even went into his dreams to try to get the combination to his vault. Now, physically, the Beagle Boys are all pretty much the same in the comics. They're these really tall, they're like twice as tall as any duck we see, like Scrooge or Donald. And they've got a bit of a stubble, they've got their hair varies. They've got like really shaggy hair or they've got no hair. And they have these thief mask around their eyes, which almost, you think they're glasses, but they all have them, and it's kind of interesting. And they each have a prison number, with the exception of a small number of them on their chest. And at some point, we even see that those numbers are emblazoned on their chest. So it's really interesting to see how deeply ingrained the Beagle Boys are to being criminals and prisoners. They clearly represent something, and I would really like to do a more in-depth story on that in my own time. Now, this is all within Carl Barks' perspective of the characters. So he was very straightforward with them. It's not to say there isn't a lot of depth to them, but there isn't a lot of actual diversity between them outside of possibly whatever gimmick that particular Beagle Boy has. It's kind of implied that they all sort of share the same experiences. One would almost think they were born in prison, like all of them. Each generation. There's at least 3 to 4 generations of Beagle Boys in the entirety of the Duck universe. Moving on to Don Rosa. When he stepped in, he basically streamlined the history of the Beagle Boys and their connection to Scrooge, which is what he does. And under Rosa, Scrooge first meets them in 1880 on the Mississippi, where he also meets Grandpa Beagle, or as he is known at this point, Blackheart Beagle. Now, the Blackheart character originates from 2 characters created by Carl Barks. Blackheart Beagle, a riverboat captain from the Fantastic River Race in Uncle Scrooge Goes to Disneyland #1 in 1957, and Grandpa Beagle, who appeared in The Money Well, Uncle Scrooge #21, released in 1958. And The Money Well is a fun story. It's kind of hilarious. The fact that Scrooge almost loses his fortune because he won't get new glasses. It's hilarious. But again, this is what Don Rosa does. He takes bits of Carl Barks' work and uses it to really tell a story. Blackheart Beagle would remain one of Scrooge's oldest enemies. Actually, he is his oldest enemy, and would clash with Scrooge in pivotal moments in his life. His first adventure in America, his moving to America full-time where he ended up fighting Teddy Roosevelt, and that was intense. And again in 1947, where Blackheart and the current generation of Beagle Boys tried to rob a now-retired Scrooge. Now, in regards to the DuckTales cartoon, the Beagle Boys are led by Ma Beagle in both the 89 and 17 versions. But at least so far, the 17 incarnations seem a bit dumber, I want to say, but they're definitely more diverse. Like, it's implied that each group of Beagle Boys have their own set gimmick. There's the standard Beagle Boy with, the regular coat, and there's like an extreme sports Beagle Boy group, and I'm like, this is intense. This is real fun, but they don't really seem as intimidating as the other ones. I think it's because in DuckTales, while they all dress alike, it also felt like there was a sense of unity and direction to them. Like, we saw this when Glomgold brought out all the Beagle Boys to attack the money bin, and while they didn't seem like there was a lot of diversity between them, they all felt really coordinated and set, and that was much more frightening. In regards to Ma Beagle, in the 2017 version, it seems to give us a more professional and dead set Beagle, more like Blackheart Beagle, who didn't have a presence in the 89 version. Like, we never saw him. It was always Ma Beagle. And I think that shows a bit of a difference between Ma Beagle and Blackheart Beagle. Blackheart, who would if we try to merge these 2 canons together, would be Ma Beagle's dad. Yeah. And in this one, it should be known that Blackheart Beagle is not a major presence in even the comics. He's very content to just be retired for the most part. So it would seem that Ma Beagle is just sort of carrying on the legacy for him in this iteration. Fun fact, the Beagle Boys are all identified by the letter B in the 89 cartoon. There was Burger, Bank Job, Babyface, Big Time, Baggy, and Bugle. And try saying that 7 times fast. Coming up next is Flintheart Glomgold, and I personally chose to put these 2 next to each other in order because the Beagle Boys can't really do a lot by themselves. They usually need someone with a lot of money and resources, and when you need someone like that, there's only one person to go to, or he'll usually come to you, and that's Flintheart Glomgold. Now, he first appeared in the 1956 story The Second Richest Duck, appropriately, and since then he has been labeled as Scrooge's archenemy, where Blackheart Beagle would be Scrooge's oldest. And I always think the archenemy is someone who sort of reflects you a bit more. He's more of a threat to you on an ideological level, on a physical level. Like, they can do almost anything you can do, and there's only a few differences between the 2 of you. And I think that's why Glomgold gets the title archenemy. Now, a little bit of history. Flintheart Glomgold usually doesn't live in Duckburg, as the cartoon would have you believe, but he's also been shown to live in Duckburg in the comics. But in referring to to most iterations, he lives in the Limpopo Valley in South Africa, and he even has his own money bin there. When the cartoon began in '89 to avoid connections with South African political issues such as apartheid, His origin was changed from South African to Scottish to match that of Scrooge, which led Glomgold to have Scotland-style names in other countries. He's been depicted as wearing a traditional Scottish kilt. The show goes out of its way to make you think he's from Scotland, and this is shown even more in the 2017 version, where the first time we see him, not only does he have the kilt, but his secretaries wear kilts and play the bagpipes. Now, Barks did 3 stories with Glomgold before he retired, and the first 2 were pretty much the same, where he and Scrooge try to prove which of them is the actual richest duck/man in the world. And they don't do much but to show the parallels between Scrooge and Glomgold, as well as the similarities. A good example would be how Scrooge, he works with his family and friends most of the time. Like, he loves his family, and a lot of times he sees them as very important figures in his life. Like, he needs them to really keep going, where Glomgold is a solitary figure, to the point where in one story it is Scrooge's nephews that carry him home after Glomgold loses the contest to see which one of them is more worthy of the title of the richest duck/man in the world. But in the third story that Barks did, I think it showed the actual evil and threatening aspect of Glomgold, which is the 1966 story So Far No Safari, where he continually tries to kill Scrooge by shooting missiles at his plane. Later on, under Don Rosa, we get more of an origin story on how Scrooge and Glomgold met, which was in Africa in 1887. In the Life and Times of Scrooge McDuck, Part 6, The Terror of the Transvaal, though Scrooge would never know his name until later. And what's interesting about that Glomgold, one time we meet him, because that Glomgold he's not rich, he's not trying to beat Scrooge. As a matter of fact, he sees himself as smarter than Scrooge. I think the best way to describe him would be as more of a dishonest Donald at this point, where later he'll become more of a dishonest Scrooge. And throughout the entire Life and Times of Scrooge McDuck, everyone Scrooge meets has an impact on him. And very fittingly, it's Glomgold who really takes away Scrooge's trust in people. As he'd said to Glomgold in that story, you just made me mean. Now, going back to DuckTales, well, we already talked about it before, but in the 89 version, Glomgold is more of a bigger threat to Scrooge, and is honestly, I think, his greatest and most consistent enemy, because he's able to mobilize as quickly as Scrooge and can employ the entire Beagle family to go after him. He is very much the kind of faceless corporate monster people think of when they think big business, but at the same time, he's also very much like Scrooge. He's stubborn, hardworking, intelligent, cranky, and cheap. But there are lines that Scrooge won't cross that Glomgold will. A good example is just the numerous times Glomgold has tried to kill Scrooge, shooting him out of the air when he was navigating his island to the scales of Macaroon, causing avalanches and Master of the Djinn, and at one point using one of his wishes to maroon Scrooge on a deserted island in the same episode. In the 2017 version, it seems more of an obsession, and he's more of a joke, really, not the dignified opponent we see in other iterations, because sometimes Glomgold just tries to make more money, like in Robot Robbers. What happens in that story is Glomgold really just gets Gyro to build another robot, but a lot of robots do construction jobs. He gets Launchpad to fly the banner around, so he really just takes some of Scrooge's key friends and just says, hey, I need you to do this job for me. And it's just this really subtle and there's nothing Scrooge can do about it, as Glomgold now seizes all the construction jobs in the city. It's really fun, I think, and a really subtle way to do it. Now, it should be noted that Glomgold doesn't want anything Scrooge has in terms of money or possessions. What he wants is to be number one, and he'll go through any means to see Scrooge ruined. But I think the problem is that deep down, Glomgold doesn't believe he deserves it. It sort of goes back to something Greg Rucka once said when he was talking about the Batman's Rogues Gallery, namely the Penguin. And he said the Penguin was smarter than Batman, but because Penguin never believed it himself, he would always be destined to fail. And I kind of like that. So Glomgold sort of settles for this, I'm going to beat you in the financial arena, where, I'm just going to do what I do best, and I'm going to cut some corners, and I'm just going to get the jump on you in one or two areas. And I think that really works. It's sort of like the men who built America. So, ending this, we're going to go with our final one, the Mistress of Magic, one of the most energetic villains ever, Magica De Spell. Now, Magica first appeared in the Midas Touch. which in 1961, where Magica is honestly going around paying wealthy people double the price for coins they have touched. Hoping, and what she wants to do is she wants to melt them on Mount Vesuvius to create an amulet that will grant her the Midas touch to make her, as she said, fantastically rich. This changes when she finds out that Scrooge has had his number one dime since he was 10 years old, and because Scrooge is ancient, she realizes that this is the one coin she needs. I mean, it's a coin that has been held by the richest man in the world pretty much his entire life. And since then, she's been trying to get her hands on that dime. Where the Beagle Boys are Scrooge's most consistent threat, and Glomgold, I would argue, is his most prevalent threat and thematic threat, Magica, I think, is his most dangerous and honest, and without a doubt, his most energetic threat. Magica breathes a whole lot of life into anything she does. The Beagle Boys like, yeah, we have fun. Glom's like, ah ha ha. Magica's like, ah ha ha ha. And she has to apologize sometimes, saying, sorry, I get carried away. It's just fun. Now, but at the same time, she's a very serious threat because she's a sorceress and comes up with multiple ways to get Scrooge's dime, and has teamed up with others to get it, like the Beagle Boys, Glomgold, and even Negaduck at one point in the Ducktales comic book where they cross over with Darkwing Duck. Now, there's a bit of a difference between the comic and cartoon version of Magica, namely in the motivation for the dime. In the comic is the idea that Scrooge's wealth is the source of the dime's power because everyone thinks that the dime itself is inherently lucky and that by melting it down she can create the Midas touch. In the 89 cartoon, in the episode Send in the Clones, she says the dime has the psychic energy and it symbolizes every dollar, every deal Scrooge has ever made, and that by melting it into her amulet, she can not only have enough power to turn her pet raven, Poe, back into her brother, which is never addressed again, but she'll be able to rule the world. I like this idea because it's very magic, in the sense that items have power based on your belief in them and the terms of what the dime symbolizes. And that is cool because it makes a lot of sense. Scrooge himself isn't very consistent between mediums on how he views the dime. Sometimes he says it's lucky, and other times he says it isn't, and that it was just the inspiration that led him to pursuing his wealth, going to America, and becoming the success he is now. But what's interesting about Magica is she often goes too far with her ideas. In one of the comics, she steals the dime but can't get it to work because she didn't earn it, and that was actually part of a much bigger story, and it was just intense. Like, Scrooge goes around the world searching for Webby because Magica kidnaps her, and the resolution of that story I felt was really good, and we might go over it at some point here. Another one is where she steals it by going back in time, using a magic candle, and she goes a bit too far and she steals it before Scrooge gets it, and she realizes it almost too late when she says, like, wait, if I take it before he earns it, he'll never become rich. And I'll have wasted all of it. It's like, no, I gotta go. And she barely puts it back in his hand before the candle burns out and she has to go back to her own time. Another one is where she teams up with Glomgold and the Beagle Boys. She does get the dime, but Scrooge tells her that the dime can't possibly work anymore because if the Beagle Boys take his money, which makes Glomgold the richest man in the world, he will no longer be the richest man in the world. Therefore, whatever spell Magica wants won't work. Now, in the 2017 version, I have to say, this is very interesting. This Magica is very interesting, and we haven't really seen her. We definitely haven't seen her physically. The fact that she is now a shadow, or is at least communicating through a shadow, to her niece Lena, to earn the trust of the nephews and Webby to get into the mansion. Now, this is interesting because in an earlier episode, Scrooge mentions there are magical protections on the money bin, and we can assume that those same magical protections are on the mansion. So, Magica can't get in, but she sends Lena in, who will more likely just be invited in because she's worked her way through. She's earned the trust of Mrs. Beakley, of Webby, and the boys, and Launchpad, so she doesn't need to get Scrooge or Donald's opinion, or their consent. They won't know who she is, so she'll just go in, and it works. So the question is, what does Magica have planned? Is it the dime, or is it something else? And that is intense. Also, Catherine Tate is doing an amazing Magica. I didn't think anyone could really live up to the energy, and she hasn't really brought that energy that the original Magica had. But I'm really excited. I think Magica and the Mystery of Della Duck are going to prove to be two of the best things out of this new 2017 series. So with that in mind, we're going to bring this video to an end. But if you are new to this channel, please feel free to like, comment, share, and subscribe. And if you have any particularly favorite Uncle Scrooge stories or favorite Duck villain moments, feel free to leave those in the comment section, and I will catch you all later. May your fandom serve you well.